2,000 people just watched her win. The blood on her cheekbone has not dried. Her hair is matted to her temple, and she is standing in the back hallway of an arena with her good hand on my jaw, kissing me like nobody told her not to. Months ago, she bit my throat on a closed gym mat at 11 at night, and neither of us pulled away. Before that, we fought each other for a championship belt that hangs in my apartment now. The featherweight champion of the world is me. The lightweight contender is her. The promotion does not know yet. Tonight, her hand is at my jaw, and the rest of the building does not exist. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. 2 years before that bite, Sable Neland walked into Vex Combat Academy on a Tuesday afternoon in August and changed the temperature of the gym by exactly 1 degree, which I noticed only because I was the kind of person who noticed temperature changes in rooms. I was hitting the heavy bag in the back corner. I was 26 years old, ranked 7th in the featherweight division, and exactly far enough into my career to understand that the next 2 years were going to decide whether I became a champion or became a footnote on someone else's championship reel. I had been training with Danny Vex for 8 months. Danny had 3 top 15 fighters in her stable, 2 title contenders across other promotions, and the kind of striking coaching reputation that meant when she said yes to taking you on, you adjusted your life around the city she lived in and considered the adjustment a privilege. Sable Neland was Danny's other featherweight project. She had been training there for 4 months before I signed on, and I had watched her on television since she came up. A cool, calculated southpaw, with the kind of fundamentals announcers use the word textbook to describe. She had won her last 6 fights. She was ranked 2nd. She was, in every objective sense, the woman whose place in the division I was going to have to take if I wanted what I wanted. I had not met her in person until that Tuesday. We had been at the gym at different hours for 4 months by some scheduling coincidence I had never thought to question. She came in at 3:15. I know because I looked at the clock the moment the door opened, and that detail has stayed in my head for 2 years for no reason except that it was the second I started cataloging her. She was 30 years old, 5'6", dark hair pulled back into the practical braid fighters wear when they have stopped caring what their hair looks like outside of competition. She was in unbranded gym shorts and a faded black tank top that had survived several hundred training sessions. She carried her gym bag slung low, no wasted movement. She did not look at the bag I was hitting. She walked to Danny's office, knocked once, went in, closed the door. I went back to my combinations. But the temperature in the room was different, in the way temperatures are different when someone enters a space and brings a different kind of attention with them. Sable did not perform attention. She was simply present in a way that made the other people in the room more present too. I noticed it. She came out of Danny's office 20 minutes later. Danny was behind her, talking something through about a pad work session. That's when Sable looked at me. It was the briefest possible look. The kind of look fighters give other fighters at weigh-ins. A clean assessment. No hostility. No warmth. Just the professional acknowledgement of someone calculating you. I held the bag I had been hitting and looked back. I did not adjust my expression. Sable's eyes moved from my face to my stance to my hands and back to my face in approximately 1.5 seconds, and then she was already turning away with Danny toward the cage in the center of the gym. I went back to my bag. I felt that look at the back of my neck for the rest of the session. That was the beginning of 2 years of being measured by Sable Neland in a gym we shared without ever sharing a conversation that mattered. Danny ran our training schedules to overlap by exactly 1 hour each weekday afternoon. She did this on purpose. Danny had been a competitive fighter herself before her knees retired her, and she had a particular philosophy about iron sharpening iron. The 2 best fighters in her stable were going to see each other every day, even if they never sparred, even if they barely spoke, because Danny believed that fighters needed witnesses for their work, And the best witness was the one whose work could potentially eclipse yours. Sable did not speak to me for the first 3 weeks. I do not mean that she was cold. I mean that we were in the same room for an hour every day, and there was simply no occasion that required speech. She did her work. I did mine. Danny moved between us with the unhurried equanimity of a coach who had decided that her 2 best featherweights would either learn to coexist or one of them would leave. In the 4th week, Sable spoke to me for the first time. I had finished a circuit and was wrapping a fresh roll of tape around my left hand. Sable came past on her way to the water cooler. She paused. She said, "Your guard drops on the 3rd punch of every combination." I looked up at her. She looked back at me with that same clean assessment, the one she had given me on the first day. There was nothing personal in it. There was nothing impersonal in it either. I said, "I know." She said, "You know, and you haven't fixed it." I said, "I'm working on it." She said, "Work harder." She walked to the water cooler. I finished taping my hand and stared at the wall and felt, for the first time in my professional career, a specific kind of fury that had nothing to do with being criticized. I had been criticized by coaches and analysts and my own father since I was 8 years old. I had been criticized by ranked fighters at press events. None of it had landed the way Sable Neland's 3-second assessment landed, because none of it had been delivered with the absolute conviction of someone who had taken the time to actually watch me work and had reached an accurate conclusion that nobody else, including me on most days, had bothered to articulate. She had watched me. For 4 weeks. While appearing not to. That night I went home and pulled tape on my own combinations and saw, exactly as she had said, my guard drop on the 3rd punch. Every time. The pattern was so consistent it was almost funny. I went into the gym the next day at 2, an hour early, and worked the bag for 60 minutes specifically on holding my guard through the 4th and 5th punch of every combination. When Sable came in at 3, she walked past my bag and I was running a 6-punch combination with my hands where they were supposed to be. She did not look at me. She did not need to. I knew she had seen. That was how it went. For the first 6 months. She would catch something. She would tell me. I would fix it. She would not acknowledge the fix. We would move on. I caught things on her too. Less often. Her stance was more disciplined than mine, but I noticed, in the 3rd month, that she shifted her weight a half second too early when she set up her left kick, and I told her so. She had looked at me for a long beat after I said it. The kind of look that was, finally, acknowledgement. She said, "I'll work on it." I said, "You should." The corner of her mouth moved. Once. A millimeter. The first sign I ever had that Sable Neland had any range of expression at all between professional neutrality and the focused intensity she carried into the cage. I went home that night and lay in bed and replayed the millimeter and tried to decide what I was doing. I did not decide anything. I just kept showing up to the gym at 2 so I could work my mistakes out before 3, and then watch her come in at 3. And then exchange the small surgical observations that were the only language we had. The pattern became the relationship. The relationship became the thing I was orbiting without naming. There was a Tuesday in month 5 where I walked into the gym at 2, and Danny was running pad work with Sable in the cage. I was not supposed to be in the cage during their session. I had my own bag work to do, but I stood at the edge of the cage for 1 minute longer than I needed to, watching Sable hit a 4-punch combination Danny was calling out, and I noticed, for the first time, after watching her hit pads dozens of times, that her breathing was a half beat off on the 3rd punch. Not visibly. Not in any way that affected the technique. Just the kind of thing you notice when you have been studying someone's rhythm without realizing you were studying it. When their round ended and Sable came out of the cage to grab water, I was at my bag pretending I had been there the whole time. She walked past me without looking at me, took a drink from the cooler, walked back to the cage. As she passed me on the way back, she said, very quietly, without turning her head. "You can stop pretending you are not watching." I did not look up. I said, "I was not pretending anything." She said, "You were doing the thing where you decide whether to tell me something. So tell me." I said, "Your breathing is a half beat off on the third punch." She paused. 1 second. Then she said, "Thank you," and went back into the cage. For the rest of that session, every time I glanced at her in the cage, she was working her breathing on the third punch, adjusting it in real time, using my note inside the same training round in which I had given it to her. That was when I understood, without being able to say it yet, that whatever was happening between Sable Neland and me had stopped being a coaching exchange a long time ago and become something else, and the something else did not have a name yet, and the lack of a name was the only thing keeping it survivable. 6 months turned into a year turned into 18 months. I rose in the rankings. So did she. By the time I was 27, I was ranked 3rd and Sable was ranked 1st, and Danny Vex's gym had 2 of the top 3 featherweights in the world working in the same room every afternoon. Other fighters in the gym noticed. The middleweight contender Ange Marek made a comment to me one afternoon about the way Sable's training intensity changed when I was in the room. Not louder, not more aggressive, just more present, more dialed in. I said, "You're imagining it." Ange said, "I am 36 years old, and I have been in fight gyms my whole adult life. I am not imagining anything." I did not tell Ange anything else. I watched Sable train for the rest of that week with Ange's comment in my head, and I had to admit, by Friday, that Ange was not misreading anything. Sable's intensity did sharpen when I was in the room. The way you sharpen when you are working in front of the person whose opinion you are not willing to disappoint. I had been doing the same thing back at her for 18 months. We never sparred. That was the rule. Unspoken, but absolute. Danny never put us in the cage together. Danny had 2 title contenders in the same stable, and Danny was not stupid. Sparring partners get hurt. Sparring partners hold back, or stop holding back, or develop the kind of resentment that comes from being repeatedly bested by a friend. Sable and I were not friends, but we were teammates in the only sense that mattered to Danny, and Danny protected the integrity of that teammate relationship by never giving us reason to break it. So we orbited each other for 2 years without ever fighting, until the promotion announced the title fight. The announcement came in March. The featherweight champion had vacated the belt due to a long-term injury, and the promotion needed 2 top contenders to fight for the vacant title. Sable was the natural choice. Number 1. The other slot was a discussion. There were 3 credible candidates. I was one of them. I got the call at 6:15 on a Wednesday morning. I was already in the gym, working the bag at an hour where the building was almost empty. My manager said, "You got the fight. 6 weeks out. Sable Neland for the vacant title." I said, "Okay." I hung up the phone. I stood in the empty gym holding my taped hands and looking at the heavy bag, thinking about the 2 years I had spent training in the same room as the woman I was now contracted to fight for a championship belt, and I felt, somewhere underneath the professional adrenaline, a much more complicated thing that I did not have a word for. Sable came in at 3. She had clearly already gotten the call. She did not look at me. She went to Danny's office. She closed the door. She came out 40 minutes later. She walked past my bag. She said, 6 weeks. I said 6 weeks. She said, "You're going to have to find a different gym." I had thought about that on the drive over. Of course we couldn't keep training together. We were now contractually scheduled to fight each other in 6 weeks, and continuing to share a coach and a facility was a conflict of interest that no athletic commission would tolerate. One of us had to leave Vex Combat Academy for the duration of the camp. I said, "Why me?" She said, "Because I was here first." I said, "That's not how this works." She said, "That is exactly how this works." I looked at her. She looked back at me with that clean, assessing expression that had been the entire surface of our relationship for 2 years. But underneath it, in the way she was holding her shoulders, in the very slight tightening at the corners of her mouth, was something I had never seen there before. She did not want to be the one telling me to leave. She was telling me to leave anyway. I said, "Danny makes that call, not you." Danny opened the office door behind us. Danny said, "I already made the call. Sable stays. Sable. Lex, I'm going to put you with Marco Leva for the camp. He's got the cardio program you need anyway. I'll keep coordinating with him. 6 weeks. After the fight, you come back here, regardless of outcome." I looked at Danny. I looked at Sable. Sable had not moved. Her face had not changed. I said, "Fine." I went back to my bag. I worked it for another 40 minutes. Sable started her own session at the bag 15 feet away, and we did not speak for the rest of the afternoon. And at the end of the session, I walked out of Vex Combat Academy and did not return for the entirety of the 6-week camp. Marco Leva was good. He was a cardio specialist with a corner reputation, and I needed cardio more than I needed striking refinement at that point in my career. The camp went well. I made weight comfortably. My fight readiness numbers came back better than they had been for any previous fight, but I was not at Vex. I was not in the room with Sable. For 6 weeks I trained in a different gym across the city, and I did not see Sable Neland once, and I should have been grateful for the absence of distraction. I missed her. I missed the orbit. I missed the small surgical comments about my guard. I missed the millimeter at the corner of her mouth that occasionally registered when I caught one of her own habits and called it out. I hated that I missed her. I hated more that I did not know what missing her meant. In the 3rd week of the camp, Marco Leva pulled me aside after a sparring session that had gone longer than it needed to. He said, "Lex?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You are sparring like someone who has something to prove to someone who is not in this room." I said, "I have a title fight in 3 weeks." He said, "I know what you have. I am telling you, your tempo is off, and not for fight reasons. Whatever it is, leave it outside the gym tomorrow." I said, "Okay." He did not ask anything else. Marco was a former heavyweight contender who had transitioned to coaching the way a lot of fighters do, quietly, without ceremony, with a trainer's economy of language. He had not asked me a single question about Vex Combat Academy or about Sable Neland in 3 weeks. He was not going to start now. He was just telling me, as a coach, that whatever I was carrying was visible in my work and needed to be set down before camp got serious. I went home that night and did not sleep well, and the next morning I worked the bag at 5:30 in the morning before the rest of the gym was open, and I left whatever it was on the bag, and Marco never had to mention it again. For 6 weeks, I trained in a different gym across the city, and I did not see Sable Neland once, and I should have been grateful for the absence of distraction. On the night of the open workouts, 10 days before the fight, I saw her for the first time in 5.5 weeks. The promotion had set up the open workout in a hotel ballroom. Fighters and media, and a crowd of a few hundred who had paid for early access. Sable was scheduled to work first. I was scheduled second. She came out of the back hallway in her camp gear and a pair of focus mitts under her arm. She walked to the ring at the center of the ballroom. Her cornermen were Danny and a striking coach I did not recognize. She climbed into the ring. She started her workout. I watched from the side of the ballroom, in the cordoned-off area where the next-up fighters waited. She was sharper than she had been 5 weeks ago. Faster. The hitch in her left kick setup that she had asked me about months earlier was gone. She had fixed it. I had told her about it in a cool, professional voice in the gym in October, and she had taken the note and worked it for half a year. And now, 10 days before our fight, she was unveiling the fixed version of her kick on a stage where I would see it. She had improved her best weapon for our fight specifically. She had used my note to do it. She finished her workout. She left the ring. Walking past the cordoned area where I was standing, her eyes flicked to me for a fraction of a second. She said nothing. But the look. The look was not the clean assessment of 2 years. The look was something else. Something I had no name for. Something that, for the first time, I read as personal. I climbed into the ring. I did my workout. I was good. I was, for the moment, on autopilot, because my body had done this routine 300 times and did not need me thinking to execute it. My head was not in the workout. My head was on the look. I finished. I left the ring. The promotion ushered both of us to the side stage for the contractual face-off, the moment where the two fighters stand nose to nose for the cameras and stare each other down. I had done 17 of these face-offs in my career. I had never thought about a single one of them outside of the moment it was happening. Sable and I climbed onto the side stage. We turned to face each other. The face-off rules were standard. 1 foot apart, eye contact only, no touching, hold for 5 seconds for the cameras. She was 4 inches taller than me. I had to look up. She was looking down. Her face was the same composed, assessing face she had worn in the gym for 2 years, but at 1 foot apart, in the heat of the ballroom lights, with her cornermen watching from the wings and a crowd of 200 people taking photos, I could see what I had never been able to see at gym distance. The composure was effort. The professional neutrality was discipline. Underneath both of them, in the very slight flare of her nostrils and the catch in her breath that no camera in the room would catch, but I was close enough to register, was the thing that had been driving the 2-year orbit. 5 seconds. Neither of us moved. The promoter said, "And we're good." Sable stepped back. She turned. She walked off the side stage. Danny was waiting with a towel. I stood on the side stage for 1 extra beat before I remembered that I was supposed to walk off too. That was the night I knew. I knew it the way you know it. Not in language, not in any sentence I could have said out loud to my manager or to Marco Leva or to my mother on the phone, but in the absolute physical certainty that something I had been refusing to look at directly was looking back at me, and had been for some time, and was not going to keep being looked away from. I went back to my hotel that night and did not sleep. The next morning, I drove to Vex Combat Academy. I did not have a reason to be there. My camp was not at Vex. My coaches were not at Vex. There was nothing at Vex that I needed. I drove there anyway. I parked in the lot. I sat in my car for 15 minutes. Then I went inside. The gym was busy at that hour. Early morning class. Half a dozen amateur fighters running through pad work. One of the welterweight contenders sparring lightly in the cage. Danny was at the front desk. She looked up when I came in. She said, "You should not be here." I said, "I know." She said, "Sable is in the back. Cooling down." I said, "I figured." Danny looked at me for a long moment. She had the face of a coach who had been in this sport for 3 decades and had seen every flavor of complicated thing 2 fighters could develop in proximity to each other, and had developed her own internal taxonomy for it, and was currently deciding which category I was in. She said, "Lex." I said, "Yes." She said, "Whatever you came here to do it now, and don't come back until after the fight." I said, "Okay." I walked through the gym. I went past the cage and the bags and the back door to the cool-down area where Danny's fighters did their post-session work. Sable was on a foam roller on her side, working out the muscle tension in her left flank. She looked up when I came in. She did not look surprised. She did not look anything. She said, "You're not supposed to be here." I said, "I know." She sat up slowly and rolled the foam roller against the wall and stood. She was barefoot. Her hair was down. For the first time in 2 years I was seeing Sable Neland with her hair down, soft around her face, slightly damp from the workout. I had no business noticing what I was noticing. I said, "The face-off last night." She said, "What about it?" I said, "I saw it." She said, "You saw what?" I said, "You know what?" A long pause. She looked at me for the count of 3. 3 full seconds of her looking and me looking and the air conditioning hum of the cool-down room going on in the background. She said, Lex, we are fighting in 9 days. I said. I know. She said, you need to leave. I said, I will. She said, now. I said, I'm going. I did not move. She did not move either. The cool-down room was small, maybe 12 feet across. She was standing 6 feet from me with her hair down and her foam roller against the wall, and I was standing at the door I had come in through. And neither of us was moving. And we both knew it. And the knowing was, somehow, worse than the not moving. She closed the distance. She did not close all of it. She closed half of it. 3 feet between us instead of 6. She said, very quietly, I am not going to do this with you 9 days before we fight. I said, I'm not asking you to do anything. She said, then why are you here? I said, because I needed you to know that I saw it, so that we can both stop pretending we have been doing something other than what we have been doing for 2 years. She looked at me. Her face did not change. The professional neutrality held. But her hand, the hand that was not on the foam roller, came up and touched my jaw. Just once. A half-second of contact. Her thumb brushed the corner of my mouth and was gone. She said, get out. I got out. I walked back through the gym. I walked past Danny at the front desk. Danny did not look at me. I walked to my car and I sat in it for 20 minutes, and I touched the corner of my mouth where Sable's thumb had been, and I understood, in the cold, quiet way one understands these things, that I had just made the next 9 days impossible. I drove to Marco's gym. I trained for 3 hours. I did not tell Marco anything. 8 days passed. I trained. I ran. I sat in the sauna. I did interviews. I did the contracted pre-fight media appearances. I answered questions about my game plan and about Sable's southpaw stance, and about whether I thought she was vulnerable to my left hook. I gave the answers I had practiced. My head was on the cool-down room, on the half-second of her thumb at the corner of my mouth. On the words she had said. I am not going to do this with you 9 days before we fight. She had not said she was not going to do it. She had said she was not going to do it 9 days before the fight. That was a different sentence. The night before the fight, I could not sleep. I went down to the hotel gym at 10:30 at night. I just wanted to get on the treadmill and walk for half an hour and burn off the electricity that was keeping me awake. The hotel had the kind of small, unspectacular gym that hotels have. A treadmill, 2 stationary bikes, a rack of dumbbells, a single mat in the corner. The mat was occupied. Sable was on it, stretching, hair down. In the same faded black tank top I had seen her in the day she walked into Vex 2 years ago. The hotel gym was empty otherwise. She looked up when I came in. She did not look surprised. I should have walked out. I closed the door behind me. She said, Lex? I said, I just came down to walk. She said, there are 11 other treadmills in this hotel. I said, I came to this one. She finished her stretch and stood. She walked to the corner of the mat, away from the treadmill, and she looked at me with the same composed face I had been reading for 2 years, and the muscle in her jaw flexed once. She said, sit down. I said, why? She said, because if you don't sit down, we are going to do something tonight that is going to ruin us both for tomorrow. I sat. I sat on the mat across from her. 3 feet of space between us. The lights of the hotel gym were the same flat fluorescents that lived in every gym I had ever trained in, and they made her hair look almost black, and her eyes look almost gray, and her composure look almost like restraint, which is what it had been all along. She said, we fight in 14 hours. I said, I know. She said, I have wanted this fight for 2 years. You have wanted this fight for 2 years. And neither of us has been entirely honest about why. I said, I know. She said, so we are going to do this professionally tomorrow. We are going to fight. We are going to do it correctly. And whatever this is, we are going to deal with it after. I said, okay. She said, okay. We sat on opposite corners of the mat for another 20 minutes. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The hotel gym hummed around us. Somewhere in the building, the ice machine clattered. At 11:15, she stood up. She said, "Get some sleep." I said, "I will." She said, "I'll see you tomorrow." I said, "You will." She walked out of the hotel gym. I sat on the mat for another 10 minutes by myself. I went up to my room. I slept 4 hours. The fight was at 9:30 the next night. 20,000-seat arena. Pay-per-view main event. 3 rounds, 5 minutes each, with championship rounds available if it went past 3. I knocked her down in the second round. She knocked me down in the third. By the fourth round, we were both bleeding and exhausted and operating on pure muscle memory, and at the 2-minute mark of the fourth, she caught me with a left kick to the body. The kick she had spent half a year fixing, the kick I had told her about. And the kick landed exactly where it was supposed to land. And I went down for a count of 4. I got up. I won the 5th round on the cards. The judges scored it 48-47. Split decision. In my favor. I was the new featherweight champion of the world. Sable did not look at me when the announcement was made. She walked out of the cage with Danny and disappeared down the tunnel and did not come to the post-fight press conference. The promotion told the media she was being evaluated by the medical team for a possible concussion, which was a polite way of saying she did not want to be in a room with me for any reason that night. I went back to the hotel at 1 in the morning with the championship belt in a duffel bag and a face that was going to need 3 weeks to look normal again, and I lay down in my bed and stared at the ceiling, and I thought about the words she had said the night before. "We are going to deal with it after." After. This was after. She was not in the hotel gym. She was not anywhere. 2 days passed, then 3, then a week. Sable Neland did not call me, did not text me, did not appear at the gym on the day I went back to Vex Combat Academy as the new champion. Danny did not bring her up. The other fighters in the stable did not bring her up. The whole gym had decided, with the silent professional discipline that exists in those spaces, that the topic was off limits. I trained. I defended the belt. I started preparing for my first title defense, which was not scheduled yet, but which the promotion was already negotiating. The featherweight division moved on without Sable Neland in the way divisions move on, and the analysts and the broadcasters and the social media all started talking about who I would fight next, and her name came up less and less in those conversations. In the 3rd week of the absence, Ange Merrick caught me in the parking lot after evening training. She was on her way home. She had her gym bag over her shoulder and a coffee in her hand, and the same direct, unbothered face she brought to everything. She said, "You look like you have not slept in a month." I said, "That is approximately correct." She said, "I am going to say one thing, and then I am going to leave you alone about it." I said, "Go ahead." She said, "Sable Neland is the most disciplined person I have ever met in this sport. If she has not contacted you in 3 weeks, it is not because she does not want to. It is because she has decided that whatever she does next has to be the right move, and she has not figured out the right move yet." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because I have watched her train at this gym for 3 years, and the only time I have ever seen her get something wrong is when she has not had enough time to study the problem." "Give her time," I said. "How much time?" She said, "As much time as it takes. She is not a woman who rushes." I said, "I know." Ange said, "Yeah, you know." She walked to her car. I went home. I slept 4 hours and got up and worked the bag. In the 5th week of her absence, I went to the gym at 11 at night. I do not know why I went to the gym at 11 at night. The gym was closed at 11. Danny had given me the after-hours code 6 months ago for the kind of late-night work that fighters sometimes need when they cannot sleep, and I had used the code maybe twice in those 6 months, and the night I used it for the 3rd time was the 5th Friday after the fight, and the only reason I went was that I could not stay in my apartment for 1 more hour. I let myself in. The lights came up automatically. Motion activated, low intensity, the gym's after-hours setting. I dropped my gym bag in the corner. I walked toward the cage. Sable was on the mat. She was sitting in the center of the mat in gym shorts and a hoodie, with her hair down. She looked up when I came in. She had not turned on the main lights. I said, "How long have you been here?" She said, 40 minutes. I said, "How did you know I would come?" She said, "I didn't know." I said, "Then why are you here?" She said, "Because I needed to be somewhere I could think, and this was the only place I could think." I walked to the edge of the mat. I did not step onto it. I stood at the edge and looked down at her. The motion sensor lights were already starting to dim. They would shut off entirely in another minute if neither of us moved enough to retrigger them. I said, "You left." She said, "I left." I said, "You did not tell me." She said, "I did not know how to tell you." I said, "You could have called." She said, "I could not have called." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I lost the fight." I said, "That is not why." She looked up at me. The lights dimmed. We were standing in a gym lit by 2 emergency exit signs and the faintest spillover from the streetlight outside the front window. She said, "Then ask me the right question." I stepped onto the mat. The motion sensor lights came back up. Low. I said, "Why did you leave?" She said, "Because I have spent 2 years being the person who is going to fight you, and that gave me a way to be near you without having to be honest about why I needed to be near you. And after the fight, I did not know who I was supposed to be around you, and I did not trust myself to figure it out in this gym with Danny watching." I stared at her. She stared back. I said, "Stand up." She stood up. We were 3 feet apart on a mat in an empty gym at 11 o'clock at night, and the entire weight of 2 years of orbit was sitting on my chest, and Sable Neland, disciplined, surgical, professionally neutral Sable Neland, was looking at me with her hair down and her hands at her sides, and her composure absolutely visible as the effort it had always been. I said, "Hit me." She said, "What?" I said, "You have been hitting me in your head for 2 years and we never got to finish it. So hit me." She said, "I am not going to hit you." I said, "Then I am going to hit you." I stepped forward. I did not punch her. I shoved her hard in the shoulder, the way fighters shove each other at weigh-ins when the cameras want a face-off, and one of them decides to escalate it. She shoved me back. It was on. It was not a fight in any controlled sense. It was not training. We had no headgear. We had no gloves. We were on a mat in an empty gym at 11 at night, and we were grappling with the kind of full-contact intensity that 2 professional fighters reserve for the cage, and the cage only. And it should have stopped. And it did not stop, because neither of us would let it stop. It should have stopped 100 ways. We were both ranked. We were both still recovering from the title fight only 6 weeks ago. We were grappling without protection in a gym that was technically closed, and if either of us got hurt, we had no one to call who would not also be required to ask questions neither of us wanted to answer. It did not stop. She caught me with a tie clinch. I broke the clinch by dropping my level, the way she had taught me by example over 2 years of me watching her drop her level against the heavy bag, and I drove her into the cage wall. Her back hit the padded mesh with a sound that was not loud but was distinct, and her breath came out in a controlled hiss that was not pain. Sable Neland did not make pain noises even at the gym, even when she was bleeding. But it was something close to it. And the something close to it lit something in me I did not have a name for. I tried to take her down. She sprawled. Her sprawl was, as always, technical and excellent, and she rotated her hips out of the angle I was trying to get, and drove her right hand into my jaw with a short hooking shot that was not full power, but was real. And I tasted copper. And I laughed. I laughed because Sable Neland had just hit me in the jaw in a closed gym at 11 at night, and the laughing was the only sound my body knew how to make in the face of a situation I had been refusing to be in for 2 years. The laugh undid her. I saw it undo her. The composure she had maintained through every face-off, every press conference, every 5-week absence, the composure that was so absolute it was almost not a feature of her face, just a permanent condition, broke for 1 second when I laughed, And her eyes went somewhere that was not professional, was not strategic, was not any of the things she had trained herself to keep her eyes on, and she came at me again. We hit the mat. I do not know who took who down. I think we both went down at the same time, which is something that almost never happens in trained grappling because the geometry of it does not work. Somebody always wins the angle. Neither of us won the angle that night. We just collapsed onto the mat with our hands locked into each other's collars and our weight on each other's hips, and I was on my back, and she was over me. And I had her cleared in a guard position, and she was trying to pass, and I was not letting her pass. She had blood on her lip from the takedown. So did I. We were both breathing like sprinters. She was supposed to be passing my guard. The technique called for her to move her hips to one side, base out with her hand, drive my knee down. She knew the technique. She had drilled it 10,000 times. Her body should have been doing it without conscious instruction. Her body was not doing it. Her body was holding still above me with her forearms braced beside my shoulders and her hair fallen forward around her face. And she was looking at me the way she had looked at me on the side stage of the open workout. The look I had not had a name for. The look that was the entire 2 years finally arriving in her face at once. I should have bridged her off. I did not bridge her off. I lay there with my hands on her shoulders and my pulse audible in my own ears, and she lowered her face 1 inch closer to mine, and her breath was on my neck. And that was when she bit me. It was not a hard bite. It was not the kind of bite that breaks skin. It was the kind of bite people give when they are trying to stop themselves from saying something. A small, controlled closure of teeth on a place where the closure could be felt all the way down. Her teeth at the side of my throat. Brief, almost careful. Not enough to mark. Just enough to admit something neither of us had been willing to say out loud. I did not move. She did not move. The fluorescent lights hummed. The mat smelled like sweat and rubber. 3 seconds. That was the entire rest of the world I knew about for those 3 seconds. Her teeth at my throat. Her hands somewhere they had stopped pretending to be doing technique with. My hands on her shoulders gripping in a way that was not stopping her and was not pulling her closer and was just simply holding on. She let go. She did not move her face away immediately. She just released the bite. Her forehead rested against my collarbone for 1 second longer. She breathed once, then she rolled off me, sat up on the mat next to me, did not look at me. I did not sit up. I lay on the mat looking at the ceiling of the gym I had trained in for 2.5 years, and I felt the exact spot on my neck where her teeth had been, and the spot was warm, and the warmth was somehow louder than the rest of my body. I said, "Sable." She said, "Don't." I said, "Sable." She said, "Lex, please, don't." I sat up. Slowly. The motion sensor lights flickered, registering the movement came up half a notch. She was sitting on the mat with her knees pulled up, and her forearms across her knees and her face in her hands. Her shoulders were not shaking. Sable Neland did not shake, but she was sitting in the posture of a person who had just discovered something about herself that she had been refusing to discover, and the refusal had been the entire structural support of her professional life. And now the support was gone, and she was figuring out, in real time, what was supposed to hold her up. I sat on the mat 3 feet from her and waited. She sat with her face in her hands for a long time. Eventually she said, into her palms, "I do not know how to do this." I said, "Neither do I." She said, "I am very tired." I said, "I know." She said, "I do not want to fight you again." I said, "I am the champion. You are ranked first. You are a contractual rematch as soon as your medical clearance comes back." She said, "I am going to vacate the rematch clause." I looked at her. She lifted her face from her hands. Her eyes were not wet. Her face was not composed either. It was somewhere between. She said, "I am going to call my manager tomorrow morning. I am going to vacate the rematch clause. I am going to tell the promotion that I am dropping out of the featherweight division." I said, "Sable?" She said, "Listen." I listened. She said, I am 32 years old. I have 8 more good years in this sport. I can move up to lightweight. I have wanted to move up to lightweight for 2 years. I am big for featherweight. I have always been big for featherweight. And the only reason I have not moved is that you and I have been in the same division, and the natural fight has been you and me. And that fight had to happen before either of us could do anything else. I said, "The fight happened?" She said, "The fight happened," and I lost. And I am going to step out of your division, and you are going to defend that title against women who are not me. And I am going to compete at a weight class where I am not your opponent, and you are not mine. And we are going to figure out, both of us, separately, what we have been doing for 2 years without the rivalry to keep us safe from looking at it. I stared at her. I said, "You're moving up to keep us apart." She said, "I am moving up to make us possible." The sentence was so quiet I almost did not hear it. She said, "As long as we are in the same division, we are commercially required to be opponents. That is a structural fact. As long as we are opponents, neither of us can do anything honest about whatever this is, because anything honest will either compromise our competitive integrity or be turned into a story by the promotion. Moving up dissolves the structure. It is the only honest move I have available." I said, "You are giving up your division." She said, "I am giving up the division I lost in. I am moving to one I can win in. The math is not as romantic as you are making it sound." The corner of her mouth moved. 0.5 millimeter. I laughed. The laugh was different this time, not feral, just disbelieving. I said, "You planned this." She said, "I have been planning this since the night we sat in the hotel gym together. I needed to lose to you first. I needed the rematch clause to exist so I could have something to vacate. I needed this conversation to happen on a mat at 11 at night because nothing else would have made me say any of this out loud." I said, "You bit me." She said, "I am aware of what I did." I said, "Why?" A long pause. She said, "Because I needed a moment we could not undo. I needed to do something honest before I told you any of the rest of this. Something neither of us could pretend later did not happen. The only language I had for that was a language we both already spoke." I sat with that. I sat with that for a long time. The motion sensor lights began to dim. We had been still long enough that the gym had decided we were no longer here. I moved. The lights came up again. I said, "Are you serious about lightweight?" She said, "I am completely serious." I said, "Danny knows." She said, "Danny has known for months. She is supportive. She has lined up sparring partners at lightweight already. The transition is real. The math works. My walking around weight is closer to 155 than 145. I have been making featherweight by misery." I said, "I did not know." She said, "You did not know because I did not want you to know. I did not want you to think I was running from the rematch." I said, "You are running from the rematch." She said, "I am running toward the version of my career that does not require me to fight you again. Those are different things if you sit with them long enough." I sat with them. I sat with them and watched her sit 3 feet from me on the mat with her hair down and her forearms on her knees, and her eyes finally meeting mine without the assessment, without the discipline, without any of the tools she had used for 2 years to keep the rest of herself contained. And I realized that what she was offering me was not a confession, it was a structure. She was offering me a structure inside which whatever this was could exist. She had built it, quietly, over months, while I had been training with Marco Leva and not seeing her and missing her without knowing what to call the missing. She had been doing the architectural work of disassembling the only barrier that had been keeping us professional, and she had been doing it carefully, because she was Sable Neland, and Sable Neland did not do anything that mattered without doing it carefully. I said, "When do you announce?" She said, "Next week. The promotion will get a press release. There will be a media call. I will say, I am chasing new challenges. The story will be that I have always wanted to test myself at lightweight. That story will be largely true." I said, "And us?" she said. We say nothing publicly. Not for a while. We let me do my first lightweight fight. We let you defend the featherweight title. We let some time pass between the rematch clause being vacated and us being seen anywhere together. The promotion is not stupid. The media is not stupid. But we make it boring for them. We make it not a story. I said. And in private. She looked at me. Her face did not compose itself. She said, in private, I would like very much to have a conversation that is not in a closed gym at 11 at night, with both of us bleeding, with the version of me that has been managing herself for 2 years, finally allowed to stop managing herself. I said, when? She said, when my announcement is out. When the rematch clause is officially gone, when neither of us is professionally obligated to hate each other. I said, that is going to be at least 3 weeks. She said, at least. I said, Sable. She said, I know. I am asking you to wait 3 weeks. I said, I have waited 2 years. She said, I know. I am asking you to wait 3 more weeks. I looked at her. I had a championship belt at home. I had a title defense being negotiated. I had a body that needed at least 8 more weeks of recovery before the next camp. I had every professional reason in the world to do exactly what she was asking, and let 3 weeks pass. I said, 3 weeks? She said, 3 weeks. I said, and then. She said, and then we have the conversation. We sat on the mat for another 20 minutes. We did not touch. We talked about other things. About Danny, about the gym, about a junior fighter she had been mentoring, about the lightweight division and who the dangerous women were at that weight, about my title defense and which contender the promotion was likely to give me first. The conversation was, for the first time in 2 years, easy. We were 2 professional fighters discussing our sport with the practiced ease of people who knew each other's work better than anyone else in the building. The only difference was that we were doing it without the wall. At 1 in the morning, she stood up. She said, I'm going to leave first. You wait 20 minutes. The cameras at the door log entry and exit. We do not need to be on the same log within the same minute. I said, you really did plan this. She said, I really did. She walked toward the front of the gym. She stopped at the edge of the mat. She turned back. She said, Lex. I said, yes. She said, 3 weeks. I said, I will be here. She said, I know you will. She walked out. The motion sensor lights tracked her to the door, and the front door clicked closed behind her, and the gym was suddenly very large and very empty and very mine. I touched my neck. The spot was still warm. I stayed for the 20 minutes. I drove home. I slept 7 hours. The press release dropped on a Wednesday, 8 days later. Sable Neland announces move to lightweight division, citing long-term career goals and physical considerations, vacating mandatory featherweight rematch clause. Promotion has approved the transition. First lightweight fight to be announced in coming months. The featherweight champion of the world, me, was contacted by 12 different media outlets within 90 minutes for comment. I gave the same answer 12 times. Sable Neland is one of the best fighters of her generation. She has the right to choose her competitive future. I respect the decision. I look forward to defending the featherweight title against whoever the promotion lines up. Wishing her the best at lightweight. It was the most boring set of quotes I had ever given. The story died within 48 hours, which was exactly what we had agreed on. I trained. I did media. I started camp for my first title defense, against a former champion who had earned the contender slot. The camp was good. Danny was at Vex full-time again, and I was at Vex full-time again, and Sable was not at Vex anymore. She had moved to a sister facility across town that specialized in lightweight strength and conditioning. And the gym felt slightly smaller without her in it, but smaller in a way that was not painful. Smaller in a way that was just different. 3 weeks passed. On the 22nd day after the bite, my phone buzzed at 6:15 in the morning. It said, coffee, today, the place on Decatur, 3 p.m. I wrote back, I'll be there. I went to training. I worked the bag for 90 minutes. I sparred lightly with a junior featherweight Danny had brought in for my camp. I went home. I showered. I changed into clothes that were not gym clothes. I drove to the place on Decatur. It was a coffee shop in a part of the city that did not particularly cater to the fight community. I had been there twice, both times alone. It was the kind of place that played music too quietly and had pastries from a bakery I did not know the name of, and a back room with two-person tables along a wall. Sable was at one of the backroom tables. She was in dark jeans and a gray sweater. Her hair was down. She had no gym bag, no professional accessory of any kind. She looked, for the first time in the entire span of my knowing her, like a woman who had nowhere to be next. She saw me. She did not stand up. The corner of her mouth moved. 0.5 millimeter. By that point, I could have written a textbook on her millimeters. I sat down across from her. She had ordered for me. The coffee in front of me was the way I took it. She had paid attention to that, somewhere across 2 years, and stored it. I said, "You ordered." She said, "I have been observing you for 2 years. I am going to use the data." I said, "Fair." She said, "How was camp?" I said, "Good. How was strength and conditioning at lightweight?" She said, "Hard. I am going to walk into my first lightweight fight feeling like I weigh more than I have ever weighed. It is going to take me at least 2 camps to figure out how to fight at this weight." I said, "You'll figure it out." She said, "I know." We talked about the sport for 40 minutes, about her transition, about my upcoming defense, about a young flyweight who is about to break into the top 10 and what we both thought of her game. The conversation had the easy rhythm of two professionals who knew each other's work. At the 40-minute mark, she set her coffee down. She said, "Lex." I said, "Yes." She said, "I owe you a sentence I have not said yet." I waited. She said, "I have been in love with you since the 11th month." I let the sentence sit between us. I said, "The 11th month?" She said, "There was a Tuesday afternoon in your 11th month at the gym. You came in early. You had been working a slip and counter combination on the bag for 6 weeks straight, and on that Tuesday I watched you get it. You hit it perfectly. You did not celebrate. You did not look at me. You just stopped, took a breath, and started the combination over again like getting it once was not enough. You had to know you could do it on demand. I watched you do that, and I thought, Sable, you are in trouble." I said, "You never told me?" She said, "I did not tell you because we were in the same division. We were going to fight. I was not willing to compromise either of our careers for a feeling I could manage with discipline." I said, "You managed it for 13 more months." She said, "I managed it badly. The bench at the open workout. The cool-down room when you came to find me. The hotel gym the night before the fight. I managed it the way an alcoholic manages a relapse, with a lot of strategy and very little success." I said, "Sable?" She said, "I know." I said, "I have been in love with you since the face-off at the open workout." She looked at me. Her face did not compose itself. She said, "The face-off." I said, "You stood 1 foot from me on the side stage and you held my eyes for 5 seconds and I saw under the composure for the first time. I saw what was actually there. And I went back to my hotel room and I did not sleep. And I drove to Vex the next morning and that is when I knew. Not before. Then." She said, "I touched the corner of your mouth." I said, "You touched the corner of my mouth and told me to get out." And I got out. And I drove to my camp. And I have been thinking about that touch for 9 weeks. She said, "So have I." We sat at the table. Neither of us moved. The coffee shop hummed around us. Somewhere in the front, the espresso machine ground beans. The music was still too quiet. The pastries were still from a bakery I did not know. I said, "What do we do now?" She said, "We have dinner." I said, "Tonight." She said, "Tonight." I said, "Where?" She said, "You pick." I have been picking everything for the last 2 years and I am tired of being the one who plans things. I said, "You planned this for months." She said, "And now I am done planning. Pick a restaurant." I picked a restaurant. A small Italian place I had been to twice that did not get fight community traffic and had a back room. I texted the host I knew there to hold us a corner table. We had dinner. The dinner was, in every meaningful way, a first date. Two professional fighters in their late 20s and early 30s having a first date in a restaurant in Las Vegas after 2 years of orbit and one championship belt and one bite on a closed gym mat at 11 at night. The waiter brought us bread. We ate it. We ordered pasta. We drank wine. 1 glass each. Both of us in camp brain still. And we talked about things that had nothing to do with fighting. She had a sister. I did not know that. She had been close to her grandmother growing up, and her grandmother had taught her to play piano, and she had not played in 15 years but still owned a small upright in her apartment that she opened sometimes when she could not sleep. She read more than I would have guessed. She had opinions about novels. I had a brother who was a lawyer in Phoenix. I had a complicated relationship with my mother. I had an apartment full of plants that I had been managing to keep alive for 3 years. We talked for 2.5 hours. When we walked out of the restaurant, the Vegas night was warm in that specific high desert way, where the air still feels like daytime even though the sky has been dark for hours. She walked beside me toward our cars. She had parked 4 spaces from mine. She stopped at her car. I stopped at mine. We were 6 feet apart in a parking lot. She said, "I am going to drive home now." I said, "I know." She said, "I am going to call you tomorrow." I said, "I know." She said, "I would like to do this again." I said, "I would like that too." She said, "Lex." I said, "Yes." She said, "Come here." I crossed the 6 feet. She put her hand at the back of my neck. Not the side where she had bitten me. The back. Her palm at the base of my skull. Her thumb at the line of my jaw. Her face tilted up because I was an inch taller than her, and she had to. She kissed me. It was not the fight on the mat. It was not the bite. It was patient. It was the work of 2 years finally being put down. The discipline she had used as armor finally being allowed to be the thing it had always actually been. A shape for love that had been waiting for permission to be love. It was brief. It was certain. It said exactly what it needed to say. She pulled back. Her hand stayed at my neck. She said, "Good night." I said, "Good night." She got in her car. She drove away. I stood in the parking lot for 2 minutes before I got in my own car. I touched my neck where her thumb had been. I drove home. I slept 8 hours. The next 4 months were, I will not lie, complicated. We were 2 professional fighters with high public profiles, in the same gym family, if not the same gym, dating each other after a championship fight that had been the most watched featherweight bout of the year. We were careful. We did not appear in public together. We met at her apartment or mine. We had dinners at quiet restaurants in parts of the city that did not pay attention to combat sports. She had her first lightweight fight in October. I cornered her. Technically, Danny was head corner. I was a personal supporter watching from cage side. The story we had floated to the press was that her old gym wanted to support her transition. The promotion played along because the promotion always played along when the story was good for them. She won by unanimous decision. After the fight, in the back hallway near the medical room, with Danny off doing post-fight media obligations and the corridor mostly empty, I stood with her while a doctor checked her hand for a possible fracture. The doctor told her it was not broken, just bone bruised, and to ice it for 48 hours. The doctor left. It was the 2 of us in a back hallway in an arena. She was sweating through her fight kit. Her hair was matted. She had a small cut on her left cheekbone that was already drying. She looked, I will say it plainly, beautiful in the way fighters look beautiful after winning. Tired and victorious and entirely herself in a way she only allowed herself to be in the minutes immediately following a fight. She looked at me. She said, "You watched me fight tonight." I said, "I watched you fight tonight." She said, "How did it look?" I said, "It looked like you. Lightweight fits you. You were never a featherweight. You were a lightweight pretending to be a featherweight for cardio reasons." She said, I knew that. I said, I know you knew. I am telling you that I saw it in the cage. She said, thank you. She closed the distance. Her good hand found my jaw. She kissed me in the back hallway of an arena where 2,000 people had just watched her fight, and the kiss was brief, and certain and entirely unself-conscious. And when she pulled back, she said, you should go. I said, I should. I went. The story did not break for another 6 months. The story broke in March, 14 months after the night of the bite. A fight media outlet ran a piece. Well-reported, sympathetic, not salacious, confirming that Sable Neland and I were in a relationship. The piece had been worked carefully by a journalist who had given us both a heads-up 2 weeks before publication. The journalist's name was Tess Holloway, and she had covered fight sports for 15 years. And she had told us, frankly, that the story was going to break eventually, and that we were better off having it broken by someone who would tell it correctly. We told it correctly through Tess. The piece ran on a Wednesday. Sable and I sat in my apartment that evening with the piece pulled up on my laptop and the comment section deliberately closed. We read it together. When we were done, she said, you are going to get questions about this for the rest of the year. I said, so are you. She said, are you ready? I said, I have been ready since the parking lot of the Italian place. The corner of her mouth moved. By that point, her millimeters were no longer rare. By that point, she smiled in private the way other people smiled in public. She said, good. The next day at training, Danny called me into her office. She did not close the door. She poured me coffee from the pot she kept on the side counter and handed it to me and sat behind her desk. She said, I read the piece. I said, I figured you had. She said it was respectful. I said, Tess Holloway is a good journalist. Danny said, she is. I have known her for 15 years. She would not have run that piece if she did not believe it deserved to be told correctly. That counts for something. I said, thank you for not making this awkward. Danny said, Lex, I run a gym. I have been running a gym for 22 years. I have had 3 married couples train under me, 4 divorces, 2 engagements that started in my locker room, and 1 long-running affair between a coach and a fighter that I had to handle institutionally because nobody handled it the right way. I have seen a lot of versions of this. The version you and Sable have done is the cleanest one I have personally witnessed. I am not going to make it awkward. I said, did you know? She said, I knew there was something to know. I did not know the shape of it. That was your business and Sable's business, and I made a deliberate choice not to ask. I said, thank you for the deliberate choice. She said, thank you for not asking me to choose between coaching you and coaching her. I said, we are not going to ask that. She said, I know. That is why I am still here. She drank her coffee. I drank mine. We did not talk about the piece again. The rest of the year was as complicated as we had expected. Press conferences with stupid questions, tabloids running the kinds of headlines tabloids run, the promotion attempting to monetize our story exactly twice, and being told by Sable that the next monetization attempt would result in her cutting her contract by mutual termination. The promotion stopped attempting after that. We were seen together publicly for the first time at a gym anniversary event in May. Vex Combat Academy was celebrating 20 years. Danny had gathered her current and former fighters for a small evening event, photos on the wall, a buffet, the kind of low-key celebration that a coach with 20 years of receipts is allowed to throw. I went with Sable. She was in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled. I was in jeans and a shirt that was nicer than my usual. We walked in together. The room paused for half a beat. Fighter rooms always pause for half a beat when they see something they have been waiting to see. And then it kept going, because the room was full of professionals, and the professionals had decided that we did not need a reception. Danny saw us across the room. She raised her glass an inch. Toward me. Toward Sable. Then she went back to whatever conversation she had been having. That was all the welcome we had needed. 2 years after the bite, I defended my featherweight title for the 3rd time. Sable was at cage side. The broadcast caught her in the audience for half a second during the third round. The commentators noted, with professional brevity, that the lightweight contender Sable Neland was in attendance to support her partner. Then they went back to the fight. I won by submission in the fourth round. After the fight, Sable came to my dressing room. She brought me water and a recovery drink and a clean towel. She helped me peel the tape off my hands. She did not say much. She knew, by then, the things I needed in the first hour after a fight, and she gave them to me without commentary. And the gift of the not commentary was enormous. When I was clean and dressed and the trainer had cleared me to leave, she helped me pack my bag. She said, "We are going home." I said, "We are going home." She said, "You fought well." I said, "I had good training." She said, "You had Danny." I said, "I had Danny, and I had you watching tape with me at 1 a.m. when I could not sleep, and you told me on the third week of camp that I was telegraphing my left kick when I was tired, and you fixed it." The corner of her mouth moved. She said, "I have been observing you for over 2 years." I said, "You are going to use the data?" She said, "I am going to use the data." We walked out of the dressing room together, out of the arena, out into the Vegas night. We got in her car because she was driving. I had been hit in the head and was not driving for 48 hours. She drove us home. Home was, by that point, a 2-bedroom in a quiet building that we shared, with my plants on the balcony and her piano in the corner of the living room, and a small framed photograph on her side of the bedroom that I had finally been close enough to see. It was a photograph of her grandmother, sitting at the piano, Sable as a child on her lap. I had looked at the photograph many times by then. She did not need to explain it. In bed that night, she lay against my shoulder with her hand resting on my arm, her breathing slowing toward sleep. I touched the side of my neck where, 2 years ago, she had bitten me on a closed gym mat at 11 at night. The skin had no mark. There had never been a mark. The bite had been controlled and precise. The way Sable was controlled and precise about everything, and it had left nothing visible. But I could still feel the warmth of it 2 years later, when I touched the spot. She said, into my shoulder, "You are touching the place." I said, "I touch it sometimes." She said, "I know." I said, "Does it bother you that I do?" She said, "No. It tells me you remember." I said, "I remember every day." She said, "Good. So do I." I said, "Sable." She said, "Yes." I said, "Thank you for moving up a weight class for me." She said, "I moved up a weight class for both of us." I said, "I know. Thank you anyway." She said, "You are welcome anyway." She fell asleep. I lay awake for another 15 minutes, with her weight against my shoulder and her breathing slow and even, and I thought about the fluorescent lights in the closed gym and the smell of the mat, and the 3 seconds when neither of us pulled away. I thought about how much it had cost her to plan everything she had planned. I thought about the parking lot and the kiss and the back hallway after her first lightweight fight. I thought about Danny raising her glass an inch. 2 years of orbit. 2 years of restraint. 1 bite at 11 at night that was the only thing either of us could do. 3 weeks of waiting. The rest of our lives. Worth every minute of it.